for your life. At the bottom of Peyam Beis, the Gemara was discussing Tumas HaTahoim. It was an issue that was raised in the Mishnah. The Mishnah tells us that Rashi tells us that there's a halacha l'Moshe Sinai that although the tzitz is not meratze on Tumas HaGuf, but if it's Tumas HaTahoim, and we're going to get a clearer definition of what it is, but the pashtus, what it means is a tumah that at the time someone contracted that tumah, nobody in the world could possibly have known about it, or better yet, no one in the world did know about it. There's a halacha l'Moshe Sinai that the tzitz is meratze on Tumas HaTahoim. The Gemara had a shaila. Does this exemption of Tumas HaTahoim, does it apply to the Bailim only, or does it also apply to the Kohen? So for instance, if the Kohen who was working on this Korban Pesach suffered a Tumas HaTahoim, will the tzitz be meratze on that as well? That was the Gemara shaila. And the Gemara wanted to bring a right to the shaila from a brisa that Rabbi Chia quoted. Rabbi Chia quoted a brisa, Loi Amru Tumas HaTahoim El Lameis Bilvad. The brisa tells us that we have a halacha l'Moshe Sinai of Tumas HaTahoim that tells us that by Pesach and by Nazir, even if there's a Tumas HaGuf through Tumas HaTahoim, it will not pass over carbon. What if the Kohen doing the work on the Korban Pesach, the Kohen doing the work on the carbon of the Nazir, what if the Kohen had a Tumas HaTahoim? Will you say the same thing, that the tzitz is meratze? Rabbi Chia said, Tumas HaTahoim is only said by Tumas Meis. So we need to understand what is this brisa coming to exclude? What Tumah does the brisa of Rabbi Chia mean to say that Tumas HaTahoim would not work? So the Gemara was probing around. The Gemara first started off with suggesting that it means Tumas HaTahoim Desheretz, which means it would only be relevant to Pesach, because a Nazir is not impacted by Tumas Sheretz. A Nazir is only impacted by Tumas Meis. So if speaking about a Tumas Sheretz, it would have to be that someone became Tomei on Erev Pesach with a Tumas Sheretz, but no one knew about it, and it's only later that you found out about it. Zok to Gemara, there are shittas who hold that even if someone is for sure Tomei with a Tumas Sheretz, he could still bring the Korban Pesach, because anyway, tonight he's allowed to eat it. The Tumas Sheretz only lasts until the evening. So just because he's Tomei, he's not the one who's actually dealing with the carbon. The Kohen is. And therefore, Tumas Sheretz does not impact Korban Pesach. So there's a shaila if it does or if it doesn't. If it does, then we can say this brisa is talking about that. If it doesn't, then we need to find another case that the brisa is excluding from the heter of Tumas HaTahoim. But we have to keep that in mind, because the Gemara is going to pull this out later and revert back to it, that maybe you hold Ein Shochten V'Zorkin Al Tamei Sheretz. But here the Gemara is saying, if you hold Shochten V'Zorkin Al Tamei Sheretz, then that cannot be the exclusion. So the Gemara said that it seems like we don't have any alternative, and therefore it must be referring to the Tumas Sheretz of the Kohen, because the Tumas Sheretz of the Kohen has a huge impact. If a Kohen is Tamei B'Sheretz, he cannot touch the carbon, he cannot be involved with the carbon, the processing of the carbon, because it's going to become Tamei and it'll become possible. And then Rabbi Yosef had a different suggestion of what the brisa is referring to. It's referring to the seventh day of Ziva. A person has to keep Shiva Nakiyim if they're a Zov. And what if that seventh day turned out being on their Pesach? So let's think about it. If at the end of the day comes and there's no Re'iyah, it turns out that he's Tahar, and tonight he can have the Korban Pesach. But if he sees later in the day, it turns out it's Soiser the Shiva Nakiyim and he was Tamei. So therefore now he's in the status of a Tumas HaTahoim, because he's in a situation where he has no idea if he's going to be Tamei or not. So if you don't have this option for Tumas HaTahoim, or the option of Tumas Sheretz, then you have to agree that Tumas HaTahoim applies to a Kohen as well. But if you will argue that Tumas HaTahoim of Ziva works, or you hold that a Yisrael who's Tumas Sheretz on Erev Pesach cannot participate in the Korban Pesach, then we don't have a raya that Tumas at Haim applies to a kohen because you can explain the brisa a different way. The reason why this is relevant is because on the next Gemara, the Gemara is going to try to contradict what we're saying from Rabbi Yosef, and that's of course going to have an impact on whether or not we have a raya that a kohen also has the halacha of Tumas at Haim. So let's see the Gemara. So the last thing that the Gemara finished off with is that Rabbi Yosef wanted to suggest that the brisa from a Pchia that says that Tumas at Haim only applies to Tumas Meis is telling us that Tumas at Haim of Ziva will not have Tumas at Haim, and therefore, if someone's a Zav in his seventh day on Erev Pesach, he will not be able to bring the carbon Pesach. Frag the Gemara, but Tumas at Haim de Ziva loy meratze? Are you actually saying that the Tumas at Haim of Ziva is not meratze, which is exactly what Rabbi Yosef just suggested? But Tanya we learned Rabbi Yosy Simon Pesachim Yom Keneged Yom Sheshachtu v'zarku Allah b'sheni shalah. So let's get an understanding of how it works. Ziva by a male works as follows. If someone sees one re'iyah, let's say on Sunday he sees a re'iyah, so the halacha is he has to toivel, he's tamei until the night, and then he's tahar. But he has to watch the next day. If he sees again the next day, he is now tamei for 7 days, and he must keep Shiva Nekiyim. If he sees a third day, then not only must he keep Shiva Nekiyim, he also has to bring a carbon at the end of the Shiva Nekiyim. That's how it works by a man. By a woman, halacha l'maisa, we hold, because of many chumras that were put upon us throughout the times of the Gemara, that a woman who sees a tibas dam kechardu, a woman who even sees any dam at all, always keeps Shiva Nekiyim, and that's how we fear her. But the Raisa works differently. A woman who sees one re'iyah is tamei for 7 days, even if she's not Nekiyim. She could see dam the whole 7 days, and as long as at the end of the 7 days she stops seeing dam, she goes to the mikvah and she's Torah. That's a nida Raisa. What happens if after the 7 Yemei nida, there's an 11-day period where a woman normally shouldn't be seeing any type of dam? If she sees dam one day, she's a zava and she's called a shemer Yom Keneged Yom, because she's tamei today. She's not tamei tomorrow, but tomorrow, if she sees it adds to the cheshbon. Now she's seen 2 days in a row. If she sees 2 days in a row, then she has to watch the third day. And if she sees 3 days in a row, then she's a zava, and then she has to keep Shiva Nekiyim. So the difference between a male and a female is a male, even after 2 re'iyas, has to wait Shiva Nekiyim, but a female, midaraisa, only has to count Shiva Nekiyim after seeing 3 days in a row. But in between, if she sees 1 day at a time, 2 days at a time, she's called a shemer Yom Keneged Yom, and she has to watch the next day to make sure she sees no re'iyah. So let's see what the Rashi says. She was a shemer Yom Keneged Yom. So she saw b'mei ziva, she saw 1 day, and then the next day she has to make sure that she doesn't see. And that next day turned out was Erev Pesach. And they shechted a carbon Pesach on her behalf, and they spritzed the dam of a carbon Pesach on her behalf, b'sheni shalah, on the second day. So Rashi says, Adayin Tzafaku, at that point, there's still a suffix. Shemetir yoim zeh, the yitztar from Esmo. If she ends up seeing dam today, it will be mitzaref with the dam she saw yesterday, and now there's 2. And if it's Sira Gam Achar, if she ends up seeing tomorrow as well, B'havalu Shloisha, now she would have seen 3 days in a row, B'havilu Zava Gemura. That would make her into Zava Gemura. On the other hand, the Maloi Tira, if she doesn't see any dam today, Titar La'erev, so she can go to the mikveh and she'll be tar. So what happens if on the second day, which means it's a day where it's a suffix, as Rashi says, and they spritz blood for her, so they process the carbon Pesach, and her mazel will be achakach rasa, and then she became tamei. So right off the bat, she can't eat carbon Pesach because she's tamei now. But like Rashi says, even though she's not 2 days in a row, she's now tamei until she goes to the mikveh tomorrow and clears the day without seeing dam. However, she's petur milasas Pesach Sheni. Even though we've undone her counting up until now, she's still potter from the Pesach Sheni. Why could that possibly be? Why would she be potter from bringing Pesach Sheni? Why would you say she was Yotze? It turns out Lemafreya, she was Tameh. So why would she have been Yotze with the carbon Pesach that was processed on her behalf? My timer. How could you possibly explain it? La b'shum de meratzah tzitz. The only possible explanation as to why a woman who we see was clearly Tameh was a Tumas at the time, because at the time there's no way she could have possibly known if she was Tameh. But Lamais, it came out that she was Tameh because she saw a Re'iyah later in the day. Yet we still say she was Yotzer Chiyuv of the carbon Pesach. The only possible explanation to this fact is that it's Meratzitz. The only thing that can make someone who's Tameh be Mekayim and mitzvah of the carbon is if the tzitz Meratz, you have intervention of the tzitz. That's the only way it could work. So Kum T'chais, we have been saying until now. Rabbi Yosef wanted to explain away the Brayso of Rabchia and say that the Brayso of Rabchia that says Tumas HaTayim only applies to Tumas Meis and not any other Tumah means Tumas Ziva, and that the tzitz will not be Meratzer by Tumas Ziva, by Tumas HaTayim. From this Brayso with Rabbi Yosef, you see very, very clearly that even though she was Tameh, nevertheless the tzitz is Meratzer. So you see that Tumas Ziva does apply to Tumas HaTayim. The tzitz Meratzer applies to the Tumas HaTayim of Tumas Ziva. Now the ramification will now be, now it pushes back on our raya, so you'd have again a raya that the tzitz is Meratzer by Tumas HaTayim even for a kohen, right? Because everything backs up to that original fact. Because everything hinges on if we can find some other way to explain what Reb Chia said, the Brayso that Reb Chia quoted, that says that the tzitz Meratzer by Tumas HaTayim only applies to Tumas Meis. That's not the reasoning why she's Yotze the carbon Pesach, even though it turned out she was Tameh. It's Mishum de Kasav Rabbi Yossi Mikanu Labohi Metama. Let's think what happened. On Sunday she saw a Re'iyah. Okay, today is Monday. She's Yom Sheni Shabbat. Today is also Erev Pesach, and they're shechting the carbon for her. So up until now we were saying if after the shech the carbon Pesach and we make speak of the carbon Pesach, if she sees dam, so it undoes the entire counting, and we say she was Tameh all along. Zok the Gemara here a chiddush that when she's a Shomer Shem Keneged Joim. So what happens? She saw dam on Sunday. Monday is Erev Pesach. Monday she goes to the mikveh. Monday morning she goes to the mikveh. She's still a Shomer Shem Keneged Joim, but she goes to the mikveh. She's tahar. They bring the karbanos for her. She's Yotze. When she sees dam later in the day, it doesn't undo what happened until now. It's a new tumah that starts now. Kum Dechois, at the time that they processed the carbon Pesach on her behalf, she was tahar. So Zok Gemara, it's Mikan Lebo Matama. So I don't need a tzitz to be Meratzer. So therefore, we can still remain with the Yosef explanation of the Brayso of Reb Chia that what is the Brayso coming to exclude from the heter of Tumas HaTayim? It's included Tumas Ziva. Why over here do we say this woman was Yotze? The reason she was Yotze is Tumas Ziva is only Mikanu La'aba. And therefore, at the time of the processing of her carbon Pesach, she was in fact Tahir. That's what the Gemara wants to suggest. Now, the problem that you're going to have, which Rashi brings up right away, is if we're saying that 3 Re'iyos combined make her into a Zava G'dola, and we say that after the first Ziva, if she toivel, she's completely Tahar, and when she sees the second time, it's like a new Re'iyah, and it's not Soisel Mafreya, so how do the 3 Re'iyos ever combine? If you're always resetting the clock back to 0 and starting over with a woman who's Tahar, how could 3 Re'iyos combine? So that's a challenge that the Gemara is going to deal with later. But we're still focused on analyzing whether or not the heter of Tumas HaTayim applies to Tumas Ziva. Frankly, more Vatanya Rabbi Yossi Aimer, you want to say that the Tumah of the Shniya doesn't undo Lumafreya back to the Riyah Rishayna, rather it's a new Tumah. Vatanya Rabbi Yossi Aimer, Zov Bal Shtei Riyos. A Zov who had 2 Riyos. So we know a Zov who saw 2 Riyos has to be Tameh for 7 days. And on the 7th day, the question is, could he bring a carbon? Tonight, so if today's day 7, tonight for sure he'll be able to eat the carbon Pesach because his Tumah ends at the end of the day. But we're talking on day 7, which is Erev Pesach. Today was day 7, and he participated in the carbon Pesach because tonight he'll be Tar. And his mazel is the Achagachara. And then on Erev Pesach, after they processed his carbon, Zan Mazel, he saw another Re'iyah, now he's Tameh. or a shemeres yom keneged yom, which was the exact shayla that we discussed a moment ago. Sheshachtu v'zar kolel b'sheni shalah. On the second day, after she toivel, they made shchidus, they processed the korban pesach on her behalf. The achach rasa, and then later in the afternoon she saw again bad luck. So the halach is hare elu metamin mishkav u'moshev lima freya. We say that anything they came in contact with, and by a zav and a zava, not only if they physically touched it, but if they placed their weight on it, even if they didn't physically touch it. So, for instance, if they sat on the couch, but the couch had a shmata over it, so they didn't touch the couch, they didn't come into contact with the couch, but their weight was rested on the couch, there's tumah there as well. Tumah transmits there as well. It's even a more chamer tumah than if they touched it. So their matama mishkav v'moshev lima freya, which clearly says that the tumah is not mikana laba. It shows that when they were soiser, it undid their entire day, and they're tame back from when their original re'iyah was. So you see clearly they're a tame, and nevertheless upatur and milasis pesach sheni, and they're part of making pesach sheni, which means even though we're clear now that in fact during the processing of their korban pesach, it turns out that they were tame, it'll still be a good korban pesach for them. The only possible way that you can explain that away is that the tzitz was maratz. So you, Rabbi Yosef, on Amud Beis, who wanted to divert and say that Rabbi Chia was referring to Tumas HaTayim of Ziva, which that's the exclusion to the heter of Tumas HaTayim. That won't work, because you clearly see that there is a heter of Tumas HaTayim by Ziva. Because otherwise, how could you possibly explain these cases why their carbon would be a good carbon? So tomorrow I have a simple answer. Amri Mailam Afer Miderbanan. Really, it's only Mekana Laba. And if it's only Mekana Laba, surely they would have been Torah while their carbon Pesach was processed. And that's why they don't have to bring the Pesach Sheni. Either Braisha, the Talmud Lafaya, that's only Miderbanan, not Mideraisa. And that's why it doesn't impact their being Yoitze, the mitzvah of carbon Pesach. So don't think that this is only my unique idea, that I can claim that the Tumul Mafrei and the Brisa is a Durabanan, because actually I have support. Rabbi Oishia also said the same thing. Tanya, Rabbi Oishia Omer, if a Zav saw on the seventh day of a Shiva Nekiyim, he saw Ziva, it undoes all of his Shiva Nekiyim. And Rabbi Yochanan told him, Lo Yister Elayoimai. It should really only be Soiser day 7. And therefore, he can count day 7 tomorrow. So he'll have 6 days. Then he'll have 1 day in the middle that he saw on, so that doesn't count for Shiva Nekiyim. And then the next day, day 8, he can count, and that will combine with the earlier 7. The Gemara. It's done with the Gemara. I don't think it's anyone specific talking. So Zok the Gemara, and Rabbi Yochanan commented on Rabbi Yoshi's halacha that it absolutely makes no sense. I'm sorry. Rabbi Yochanan said it's only Yoimai, and the Gemara asks on Rabbi Yochanan that it absolutely makes no sense. How could you explain why just that 1 day is nistar? If you hold that when the person sees Ziva on the 7th day, Lemafreya, it undoes his full Shiva Nekiyim, and therefore he starts all over, well, then that full kilonister. Then of course it comes out that he didn't have Shiva Nekiyim at all, and he has to start tomorrow from scratch. And you couldn't argue that just 1 day he lost. And if you say that he's not Tameh when he sees his Ziva on the 7th day, only starting from now, moving forward, well then Yoimei Namiloi Nister, then he still got his Shiva Nekiyim in, because he had part of today until he saw the Riyah. So you had a Shiva Nekiyim, and therefore this should be a whole new Tumah. So it doesn't make any sense. Elaima, what you'll have to explain Rabbi Yochanan is saying is not Lo Yistar Ela Yoimai. What Rabbi Yochanan's time was Lo Yistar V'Lo Yoimai. Rabbi Yochanan is arguing, and Rabbi Yochanan is saying that when a Zav on the 7th day sees Ziva, it shouldn't even be Soiser Yoimai. We should say that he had his Shiva Nekiyim, and this Ziva that he saw now was the beginning of a new cycle. And Rabbi Oishia told Rabbi Yochanan, interesting that you say that, because Rabbi Yosy holds just like you. So, Frank the Gemara, how could Rabbi Yosy claim that Rabbi Yosy agrees to Rabbi Yochanan that it's only mikanu le'haba, because that's what Rabbi Yochanan was saying. It's only mikanu le'haba. Rabbi Yosy Amar mitamin mishkav b'moshev l'mafreya. So how could Rabbi Yosy comment that Rabbi Yochanan, who says it's only mitamin mikanu le'haba, he holds like Rabbi Yosy? Rabbi Yosy says beferish that he's talking even l'mafreya back to the beginning of the 7 days. Elalav shmamina mitamin l'mafreya midrabon shmamina. Matthew Rabbi Yosy also understood that when Rabbi Yosy said it's mitamin l'mafreya, it's not mitamin l'mafreya midaraisa. It's only mitamin l'mafreya midarabanan. But midaraisa, he's completely Torah. We consider that he had Shiva Nikim, and this Re'iyah that he saw is a beginning of a brand new Re'iyah. We can start counting now his Re'iyahs. Zok Gemara Vayter. Ula Rabbi Yosy. Now that we're following Rabbi Yosy, Hashta da'amar mikanu la'avohu matama. Now that we're saying that he's tamei mikanu la'haba when it comes to a Re'iyah on the either a woman who's Shomer Shem Keneged Yom on the second day or the 7th day of Azov, it's only Matam Mikan Laba, but up until that point we say it was Tar. So let's go back to the brisa that we discussed yesterday. What in the world did Reb Chia's brisa mean when it said that the Tumas Atoim, the heter of Tumas Atoim only applies to Tumas Meis? We've knocked off Ziva because it's not negate to Ziva anymore, because there is no Tumas Atoim by Ziva because it's Mikanu Laba. So you don't even have a case where it would be needed. So where would it be relevant? So Nifshet Mina, we have to go back to the Raya that we're arguing. The Kohen, it must be that the Bryce is referring to the Kohen, and it's referring to Tumas Sheretz, where the Kohen became Tameh with a Sheretz on Erev Pesach. He didn't know about it. And it must be saying that the Kohen would not have Tumas Atoim. No, it must be that the Kohen would not have Tumas Atoim. Okay, the Kohen would not have Tumas Atoim by a Sheretz, but by a Tumas Meis, he would have Tumas Atoim. Because what the B'chi was saying is, the Bryce of B'chi was saying that Tumas Atoim only applies to Tumas Meis, not to other Tumas. The only other Tumas that it could be relevant for would be Tumas Sheretz for a Kohen, which would mean that a Kohen is included in this Halach Lamash Mesinai. He doesn't have the heter of Tumas Atoim for Sheretz, but he will have the heter of Tumas Atoim for Tumas Meis. So you have a Raya again. Army took the word Oilam B'Bailam. Really, the Bryce is thinking about the Bailam and not about the Kohen. So what Tumas Atoim are we talking about other than Tumas HaMeis? Uve Pesach, we're talking about Pesach. It's going according to the Mandama who holds that if someone's a Tomei Sheretz or there of Pesach, he cannot be part of a Korban Pesach. And the Chiddush is that if someone was Tumas Sheretz, but it was Tumas Atoim, he didn't know about it, the heter of Tumas Atoim will not work. And if someone's a Tumas Sheretz not knowing about it in Erev Pesach, he will not be able to be part of the Korban Pesach. The Itzrach Lamute, and that's why you need the Brisa to tell us that the heter of Tumas Atoim does not apply to Tumas Sheretz, it only applies to Tumas Meis. So let's go back to what we were saying. Rabbi Yosy said that it's only Mikanu Laba, which means Azav or Azava saw on Sunday, and the next morning, Monday, she goes to the mikveh and she's tahar, and after she goes to the mikveh, she sees down. Rabbi Yosy learns that Mikanu Laba, meaning it's not such for anything that happened in the past. You're starting now from scratch. So, Frank the Gemara, if that's the case, how could you ever have a woman who's a Zava Gedoyla if we're saying that if she wakes up in the morning and she's tahar, and then she goes to the mikveh, and then she sees dam later that day, it's not soish for everything l'mafreya. We're starting now from new. So how do you ever get 3 days combined? So either b'shefas, either it's speaking where she was running dam for 3 days straight, and therefore there were no nakim at all. So they're 3 days combined. Which means no day ever started without seeing dam. So she lost that day as soon as it started. So for instance, let's say Sunday evening before Shkia, she starts seeing dam, and her dam is running for an hour. So it runs through the Ben Hashmoshes into Sunday night. So now Monday already started without any Tahira. So she lost Sunday, she lost Monday, and they combine. And then Monday evening, again she sees dam for an hour. That spans the whole period of Ben Hashmoshes, which means she lost Tuesday as well. So that's called seeing 3 days, and that's how she could become a Zava Gedoyla. Rashi brings a raya from here that it's not about the daylight. If she sees at the beginning of the night, that's also soiser. You don't say that the counting starts in the morning. Even if in the evening she started off without any dam, if she wasn't Shavas all in Ishmoshes, and she saw dam later in the evening, in fact, we would weiter say that it resets itself. So that's why it would be Ishmoshes, which means the day couldn't even start at the evening without her seeing dam. So each day was basically a non-starter. Zok more about it. Boy Rav Yosef. Koin hamaratza b'tamid. Now we know that this Gzeres HaKosov, I take that back, this Halacha L'Moshe Sinai, that was said regarding the Pesach, that was said regarding the Nazir, what happens by a Tamid? Boy Rav Yosef, Koin hamaratza b'tamid. A Koin who's maratza b'tamid. Hutra loy tumas atoymay loy. So this is all based on the fact that if you hold that the Koin has the heter of tumas atoym, does it also apply to if he was working on the carbon tamid? If you'll say, if you're going to learn like the tzad of the shiloh that we had yesterday, that the heter of tumas does apply to a kohen amaratze b'tamid mai. What would be the halacha with a kohen who was working on the carbon tamid, and then after he worked on it, he found out that he became tamid earlier, but tumas atoim? Do you say that tzit is maratze? Do we say kigamiri tumas atoim b'pesach b'tamid loigamiri? When we had this halacha l'Moshe Sinai was only applied to Pesach and Nazir, but not to carbon tamid. Adilma yol of tamid be Pesach, or maybe you could learn the halacha from carbon Pesach to the halacha of carbon tamid. So Rabbi responds, Kavachimer, Uma b'makom shaloi hutruloi tuma yedua hutruloi tumas hatoim madach by a carbon Pesach. If you're a yachid and you became tamei, you're not allowed to be in the carbon Pesach. You're disqualified. Yet, tumas hatahaim, you won't be disqualified. Meaning, if on Erev Pesach after you brought your carbon, you were notified that you became tamei from a tumas hatahaim, you were yoytze the mitzvah of carbon Pesach. So makom shehutru lo tumah yedua. So by the carbon tamid, where if it became tamei, meaning the tzibur is tamei, there the carbon tamid would be allowed to be brought because of tumah hutru b'tzibur. Einay din, wouldn't you argue to hutra like tumas hatayim? Surely it should also have the leniency of tumas hatayim, because the carbon tamid has a leniency. Its leniency is that it could be brought betuma. So therefore, which a carbon pesach cannot be brought betuma if a yachid tamid. So if a carbon pesach has the kula of tumas hatayim, surely the carbon tamid should have the kula of tumas hatayim. Amri, the Gemara answered, you're never allowed to use a kal v'chomer from a halacha l'Moshe Sinai to spread that chiddush elsewhere. Halacha l'Moshe Sinai is exclusive to what it was stated regarding, and you don't learn any limudim to pass on the halacha that we learn from halacha l'Moshe Sinai to other things. But Tanya we learned, Amalei Rebbe Eliezer, Akiva, etzem kesayer halacha. So let's take a step back. There's a long brisa in Shabbos that Rashi brings down the Shiloh. And what happened is as follows. It's a Nazir, Rashi says. What happened is we know a Nazir that comes in contact with Tumas Mace. If a Nazir becomes a Tumas Mace, it's Soiser his Naziris, and he has to start counting all over again. Now, we know the halacha is there's many different ways to become Tumas Mace. One of them is to come in contact with the Revius of Dam. Another way is to come into contact with an etzem kesoira, a small, tiny little bone the size of a barley kernel. The Gemara said over there that a revius dam, even though you do become tumas mace, if you touch a revius dam, nevertheless it will not be matama the nazir if it will not be. I'm sorry, it won't be matama. It will not destroy his naziris. The tuma of a revius of dam will not destroy his revius. It doesn't destroy his naziris. That's correct. It's not destroy his. It will not destroy. Rabbi Lazar said it won't destroy his naziris. If he became correct. So if he become tamei machmas revius dam, Dr. Rabbi Lazar, it will not destroy your naziris.
What's his procedure now?
He probably has to be retire himself, but he's still not. It doesn't ruin his Naziris. He can still count.
He doesn't have to start all over again.
Correct. And Rabbi Kiva argued with him. And Rabbi Kiva had a kavachomer. Madach etzem kisoyra. Etzem kisoyra, if you touch it, you become tummy. But it doesn't, it's not matama ba'oil. Because we know certain tumas are mace, if you're under the same roof as a tumas, as a mace, or under the same roof as a part of a mace, you're automatically tummy. But an etzem kisoyra, a very small bone, that does not have tumas oil. Nevertheless, if a Nazir touches that etzem kisoyra, he's going to lose his Naziris, and he'll have to start over again. Revius dam zok Rabbi Akiva, which is a more serious tumah than etzem kisoyra, because a revius dam will be mitama you by oil of mace. If you're in the same oil as a revius of dam of a mace, you will become tummy. So the revius dam is actually a more serious tumah. Surely it should destroy your Naziris. And on that, Rabbi Eliezer responded to Rabbi Akiva, Amalei Rabbi Eliezer Akiva, etzem kisoyra halacha. That an etzem kisoyra, that an etzem kisoyra, a Nazir is megaleich. That we say that an etzem kisoyra destroys Naziris. That's a halacha l'Moshe Messinai. Revius dam is a kal v'chomer. You want to say the same way an etzem kisoyra destroys Naziris, so to a revius dam will destroy the Naziris with a kal v'chomer. But etzem kisoyra we only know destroys the Naziris because of the halacha l'Moshe Messinai. Ve'in done in kal v'chomer me'halacha. So you see this precedent that you never spread something that you learned through a halacha l'Moshe Messinai, you never spread that to other things through a kal v'chomer. So too in our case, even though you have a kal v'chomer, that the carbon tumid should also be protected with this heter of tumas hatoim, you can't make that kal v'chomer because the nekar of tumas hatoim is a halacha l'Moshe Messinai. Ela amar Rava, zokt Rava, yalef me'adai mepesach. The reason why I would want to include the carbon tumid with the heter of tumas hatoim is not through a kal v'chomer. It would be by making a limud of me'adai from Pesach. It says me'adai bePesach. It says me'adai beCarbon Tamid, and that's how we would want to learn that halacha. So it's not from a kal v'chomer, it's from a specific Zer Shava, and that you could use to extend the scope of a halacha l'Moshe Messinai. And we already know it's a halacha l'Moshe Messinai, but the Gemara at this point did not know that yet. At this point, the Gemara still thinks that it might be a different limud. So you have to say ein muktam mu'ukim b'Torah, ein muchtar mu'ukim b'Torah, even by the Gemara, because the sugi that we just discussed already knows that the makar of the tumas hatoim heter is halacha l'Moshe Messinai, but now the Gemara is starting from scratch, going through the thought process how we knew that. But tumas hatoim gufa hechaksiva. I don't have a watch. What time is it? 6:37. Okay, so we're good for time. Amar Rebbe Lozer. So this is how we know the inyan of tumas hatoim. Amar Kra. The chiyamus meisalav. It's referring to a Nazir. It says the chiyamus, is this the Nazir or is this by carbon Pesach? The chiyamus meisalav Pesach Pesach. This is speaking about a Nazir. So when it says meis alav on him, we learn that it's been mechuveres alav. We know that he has to be aware of it. When will the Thomas meis of a Nazir destroy his Naziris? That's only if he knew about it. Zok the Gemara Ashkech Nazir. Okay, that's how we know a Nazir. Tumas hatahoim is not going to cause him a problem. Oysa Pesach minalam. How do you know that someone making a carbon Pesach as well could still bring the carbon Pesach even though he had a tumas hatahoim? Amar Yochanan Amar Kra b'derech rechaika lachem. It has to be lachem b'mechuberes lachem. And Rashi tells us that the lachem is not only going back on the derech rechaika, the lachem is also going back on the tumah discussed earlier in the pasuk. It has to be b'mechuberes lachem. It has to have been obvious to you, but lachem is plural. We're comparing the tumah to the derech rechaika. Ma derech begoli, just like the derech everybody could see, not just one or two people. Av tumah nami begoli, so to a tumah that will not allow you to bring the carbon pesach is only a tumah that's begoli. Meisei freik the Gemara. It's impossible to say that these psukim that we just discussed are the makar for the heter of tumas hatahoim. Why? Because the Brisa says as follows: Eizeu tumas hatahoim. What is tumas hatahoim? Kol shaloi hikr ba echad b'soifa olam. Nobody at all, anywhere in the world, could have been aware of this tumah. That's the heter of tumas hatahoim. Hikr ba echad b'soifa olam. If even one person in the entire world knows about this tumah, ein zeh tumas hatahoim. this would not qualify as tumas hatayim. Now, from this brisa, you clearly see that the reasons that we brought, the three reasons that we just brought, cannot be the right reasons. According to Rabbi Elazar, who learns that the tumah of Nazir is only if he's aware of it, he has to know about it. So that doesn't stem with the brisa we just quoted that nobody's allowed to know about it. Rabbi Yochanan the Amar lachem b'mechuveres lachem. So let me make myself clear. Rabbi Elazar the Amar b'mechuveres lachem, even if other people knew about it, it shouldn't be a problem. It's still considered tumas hatayim. Rabbi Elazar seems to say, unless I myself know about it, it's considered tumas hatayim. So the whole world could know, except for me. And according to Rabbi Elazar, that should still be a tumas hatayim. Yet the brisa says, if anybody knows, it's not a tumas hatayim. Rabbi Yochanan Amar lachem b'mechuveres lachem ad yada batrain. According to Rabbi Yochanan, if two people don't know about it, it's still considered tumas hatayim. Yet the brisa says even one person. And
yes, but there was but there wasn't a machlokes here. Rabbi Elazar was talking about the makar for Nazir, and Rabbi Yochanan was talking about the makar for Pesach.
But what the Gemara is saying is they all have to be wrong no matter what. That's all it's trying to say. Because they don't fit all of their
both of them don't fit this price. Both of them don't fit the price.
That's right. They don't fit the definition. Everybody has to know. Once again, the brisa says that if even one person beside Ilam knows, it's not going to be considered tumas hatayim. Ella tumas hatayim, we don't learn out of a pasuk. It's hilchos al gemir la ukra asmachta ba'alma. The makar that tumas hatayim is going to be overlooked, so to speak, is halach l'mashim Sinai applying to these things, and that only applies if nobody knows it beside Ilam. Zok the Gemara. Amar Mar bar Ravashi. Lo shanu ela shenoida loy la'achar zrika. This that we say that the tzitzis maratz on tumas hatayim, both by a Nazir as well as by an Yosy Pesach, that's only if he didn't find out about this tumas hatayim until after the zrika. The chiyis darek dam shaper is dark, because when they made the zrika, they had no knowledge whatsoever of this tumah. So since they had no knowledge of this tumah, and then you found out, I'm afraid that the fellow was tummy all along, you have the retweet tzitz of tumas hatayim. But if he found out before the zrika, but after the shchita, of course, loy maratza, then this tumas hatayim does not work. It says, if someone walked down the street, and the street was all of 6 feet wide, and after he walked down the street, they found out that there was a mace that was buried underneath the road, perpendicular to the road. So we know without a doubt that he walked over that mace, because it's impossible for him to have walked down that street without walking over the mace. Oh, okay, it was a 5-foot road. Zok the Gemara, L'truma, Tameh. For Truma, he would be Tameh, meaning he would surely not be able to eat Truma moving forward. But Nazir, the Yosy Pesach, tahar. But for a Nazir and the Yosy Pesach, he's going to be tahar. Zok the Gemara, v'chal tamei v'tahar. Whenever a brisa Mishnah uses a lashon of tamei and tahar, it's never paskening legabe something that happened in the past. It's v'chal tamei v'tahar labohu. When the brisa is saying tahar, meaning moving forward, he can firzach like he's tahar, meaning you would be able to make this rika even after this had occurred. And the problem is, if you're telling me that the heter of tumas hatayim is only b'di'evid after the zrika was done, but before the zrika was done, you don't have tumas hatayim, how do you explain the brisa who says tar even lagabe something moving forward? You have to say that they didn't do the zrika yet, and it's tar, meaning if you made the zrika after this occurred, it would still be tar. Therefore, we have to change what Mar bar Ravashi said. And we have to say, this is what he said. Don't say that. Say the opposite. So if they shechted his carbon Pesach, and then he found out that he was Tameh, or the Nazir, they shechted his carbon, and then they found out that he was Tameh, you're allowed to go make this Rika. Avada, if you found out that he was Tameh before the Shechita, there you're not allowed to make a Shechita, because you know he's Tameh. He's a regular Tameh person. But if after the Shechita he found out that earlier he had come into contact with the Tumas Hatahim will allow him to make this Rika Lechatchila, and that's where the tzitz will be Miratza on his Tumas Hatahim. Gufa. Let's go analyze what Tumas Hatayim is. Hamoitze meis mushka v'lerach b'shel derech. So the truma tamei l'nazir b'shel pesach tahar. Hamedavar amorim. When do you say that the truma tamei is she'ein loy mokim lavor? If it would have been impossible for him to have walked down this road without for sure becoming tamei. Aval yesh mokim laver. If it's possible that he went by and didn't come in contact with the mace, after truma tahar. And the answer is simply because we have a rule, Suffolk Tamei, Rishus HaRabim, Sveiketar. Anytime there's a Suffolk of Tumah occurring and this story happened in the Rishus HaRabim, it will be Tar. So the only way we'll say that this person is Tamei and he can't eat Truma is only if we're sure that he would have come into contact with the Tumah. That's only if when they unearth this mace, the mace is complete. So there's an uninterrupted line right across the street that you cannot cross without becoming tamei. If it's just little body parts here and there, tahar, then it would be tahar because it becomes a suffix again. Shema beina prakim avar. Maybe the person who walked by walked where there was a gap, and therefore it's a suffix. It's suffix tamei because rabbis make it tahar. But with a kever, if it was an official grave, it wasn't just body parts. Then afilu mishavim mafur tamei. If they shall kever mitzarfei. The halacha is if you walk over a kever, you're tamei. Even if that area of the kever that you walked over, there is no mace in it. But once there's an official kever, it makes the entire area tamei. This that we say that it's possible that you avoided the tumah, that's if you were walking on foot. If you were carrying a heavy load, when you carry a heavy load, you don't walk a straight line. You move over from side to side, you readjust. Or you're in a wagon, so your floor now is a big floor, the whole footprint of the wagon, which would be an oil, tamei, then you're going to be tamei. When you're walking just by yourself, it's possible that the route you took didn't go over a body part. If you were loaded up, meaning you would have been shifting your load and you move back and forth, you don't walk with a straight line. Or if you're riding in a wagon, it's impossible that you didn't either touch or became an oil over the tumas mace, and therefore you're going to be tamei. That won't be a suffer. But medavar mamur b'tumas hatayim. This is only by tumas hatayim. Aval b'tumah yedua. But if it's a tumah yedua, then it's tamei. Meaning, when do you say that the Nazir of Yosy Pesach is tar, and you have this special heter of tumas hatayim? That's if it's a tumas hatayim doctor. But if it was known that this mace was there, then in fact you're going to be tamei. The Eizahi Tumas Hatahim. What is the definition and the characteristics of Tumas Hatahim? Kol Shaloi Hikr Ba Echad B'Soif Olam. It has to be that no one ever knew that this Tumah was there. Aval Hikr Ba Echad B'Soif Olam. If there's even one person anywhere in the world who was aware that this mace was buried there, Ein Zeh Tumas Hatahim. That would not be called Tumas Hatahim. So therefore, let's see how this works out in practical terms. Matzah Taman B'Teven B'Offer B'Tzeres. If the mace is found under a pile of rubble, like Teven Offer and Tzeres, which could have happened by itself and nobody would have noticed, that would be considered a Tumas Hatahim. But the Mayim, Bafela, either in water or in darkness or in amongst rocks, where that's not completely concealed, ain't a Tumas Hatahim. There, the likelihood is that someone would have seen it. Raja of Mayim, Bafela, Nakika Shloim, ain't Zu Atama Mechosav in Alam, it's not completely covered. A meitzis might have been able to see it. Someone who was looking could have seen it. Well, like so Tumas Hatayim means that nobody whatsoever could have ever possibly seen it. Do we have some time?
48.
Okay, we can do the mission. Nitma Shalim.
Yes, a good question.
Yossi, can we agree that the guy who's buried across the road is not a Tumas Hatayim? Somebody buried him. Somebody knows about it.
No, Lavdavka. Maybe he just died there and got covered over.
By what?
If he was buried there, then somebody beside Philo knows.
Right. That's what I'm saying. If he's buried,
So it must be the Bride of Beferish says this is a Tumas Hatayim because Lagabi Pesach and Nazir, the Bride says it's tar. So this had to have been a Tumas Hatayim.
but somebody had to have buried him.
No, maybe he just died there and he got covered over.
That's why they made a road. Because they didn't know.
Otherwise, why would have made a road? Maybe it was Europe. where they didn't care about Jews. Mech, what were you saying?
Yeah, so my question is, in this Tumas Tahim, how would it play out? When would they have known about this body laying in this road? When would
I guess maybe after, let's say they were doing construction. So he walked by that street, and then he did the Korban Pesach, and then they were doing construction, they were digging up the road, and boom, they see a body there.
after Pesach or something?
So the very first time it was ever discovered would have been after this fellow's Korban Pesach was shechted.
Uh-huh.
So the timing has to be perfect. They had to have discovered it, or he had to become aware of it just at the time after the shechita, before the shechita.
They weren't union laborers. They worked on every Pesach.
Geweldig. Zog to my weiter.
It makes sense that this happens because remember the Gemara always says that they use construction of the roads for the early rebuilding.
That's right. So they're busy doing the final touches. Kaiju says they used to be, the construction crews were out in full force during the time of Eliyah Rego to make sure that all the roads were good. Zog to my nitma shalom erubai. If the entire Korban Pesach became tamei, or most of the Korban Pesach became tamei, they're sarfin oisel lefnei abira me'atzei amaracha. You have to burn it. You have to schlep it back to the Beis Hamikdash, burn it right at the Beis Hamikdash, and you get to use the wood that the Beis Hamikdash provides. Nitna me'utai. What if a little small piece of your Korban Pesach became tamei, or v'anois, or the part of the Korban Pesach that you didn't finish eating? That saying they don't make you schlep back to the Beis Hamikdash. You could burn that in your backyard wherever your tailgate party is. But then you have to use your own wood. But at Tziknin, the cheapskates, they always schlep, no matter what it is, back to the Beis Hamikdash to burn it. They always only burn it by the Beis Hamikdash so they can chop free ma'atzei meracha. It's like someone who only eats in shul. Because Busselach Essen von der Heim, ich lasse den Schiel dort noch besticken. My eigen Geld soll ich ausgeben, dann echte geduld. So they say a famous story about a fellow who said, I never had a coffee in my life that I really enjoyed. Because I like a coffee with 2 sugar cubes. When I'm in shul and it's free, I always take 3 sugar cubes. When I eat coffee at home and it's my own sugar cube, there I only put in 1 sugar cube. So I never really have a coffee the way I really like it. So I just want to learn one more line. My time, why do you have to burn lefnei abira? We want to embarrass a guy. You were careless with your Korban Pesach, and all of it became tamei, or all of it, or most of it became tamei. That's really carelessness. You're going to burn it in front of everybody, so everybody should see what you did, that you were a fool. A little bit, you're not going to hold someone liable for it, but all of it, which means these cheapskates, they didn't care if people look at them like lowlifes, thinking that they were negligent in the Korban Pesach.
That's right. That's right. Anything to save a buck.
That's right. Shkoyach.
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 Shkoyach.